everyone. I'm Maritz Verone and welcome to my podcast, Things You Can't Unhear. As a presenter with a focus on wellness, I have interviewed very many health professionals in my time and heard stories that have opened my eyes about the world we live in today. But I found the best bits that I take home with me and the things I heard that have changed my life are usually when the recording shuts off and we can talk in length behind the scenes. And that's the information that I want to share with you on this podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me and someone I've been really interested in interviewing for many years. Her name's Nat Kringoudis, and if you haven't heard of her before, you're in for a treat. She's a doctor of Chinese medicine, an acupuncturist, an author, a wellness speaker, and also the founder of a women's health clinic in Melbourne, Australia called the Pagoda Tree. So if you've ever had any questions about women's health in general or the pill or ovulation or IVF or PCOS and want to look at it from a natural perspective, she is your go-to expert. So hi, Nat. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you so much for having me. I like being on this side of the microphone sometimes.
More relaxed over there.
Yeah, I didn't have to do that much prep. If I don't know what I'm talking about by now, we're in trouble.
That's right. And, you know, you're here to continue sharing your passion and your vision and your knowledge with all of us. And for people who haven't met you before, this might be new. So you're, as I said earlier, in for a big treat with Nat. She's very passionate about what she knows. So it's exciting. And it's all about hormone health. You're often referred to as the Hormone Revolutionist. That's a pretty impressive term.
I gave it to myself.
Oh, good on you.
No, I'll tell you why. I wanted women to look at the way they were approaching their hormones differently, and I wanted it to be refreshing and slightly fun and not a drag, a bore, and something that you rolled your eyes about and said, well, I'm just hormonal.
Yeah, that's right.
So the idea of the revolutionist part of it came from there. And since then, many people have tried to take the title.
But it's yours and they can't.
But nothing like Google search words to squash that.
Oh, I absolutely love it. You know, it's funny, we don't think about our hormones until something actually goes wrong with them. And
so true.
Yes. Do you find that with a lot of women that you speak to, or all of the women that speak to?
No one is going to care about something that's not, well, they don't think to be a problem until it is a problem. However, you know, I've said in my latest book, your hormones are your life hack. And if you can get that sorted, life becomes a lot easier because they are the messengers that control everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, we might look at our hormones as being just involved in our menstrual cycles, and we might feel a little bit crappy just before we get our period. And it's often a time where we say, I'm so hormonal. Or your husband or partner will say to you, you expecting something soon?
Yep, that
they
happens
notice.
in my house.
Yes,
Don't worry about that.
And that's the time that we'll be like, oh, you know, we'll blame it on our hormones. But what does that actually even mean?
And do we have to put up with this forever? Is there anything that we can do about it?
Of course, there's so much that we can do. And that's the thing. If we don't know that we can, you know, so often, use the period as an example. This is actually the third podcast I've done today, so I'll just keep on regurgitating the same things that I've said. But we use the period as an example. We have been told as women that, honey, it's going to be a time, you're going to have pain, it's just part of being a woman, and to suck it up. And I'm here to say, no way. Like, that doesn't have to be that way, and it's not 1992 anymore, and we know better. Right. Even 1984 or 1969, I don't know, whatever year it is, but we know better now. We know that that's, you know, pain is a result of inflammation. Why is that there? So the one thing I get people to always ask is, but why? You know, we have a diagnosis sometimes, we know what we're dealing with, and sometimes we don't, but we can still ask that question. But why is this happening to me? I have pain, but why do I have pain? You know, not just grabbing the Panadol and that's fine. I'm not saying you need to suffer, but why is it happening?
Yep.
And if we
the
can,
root cause
that's
of
right.
it, and not
you know,
just
really
ignoring
ask the questions, and even the root cause again. But why? You know, you're diagnosed with maybe something like endometriosis. Okay, but why is my body doing that? And there is always core reasons or something that you're doing that's triggering your body to respond that way. And so it's about backing things up to be able to see whether or not that has an impact enough to reduce your symptoms to a point where it's actually, you are predispositioned or potentially genetically gifted endometriosis, but it doesn't have to be something that stops you living your life, and it can be just part of your genes, and that's where it stops. It's not a problem for you. So it's really about hacking then, isn't it? Biohacking and working out what's triggering things for you and your family or whoever it is that you're trying to treat, and getting to the root of it.
So how do you treat some of these symptoms that you've just listed here?
Well, again, we are like, I say this, in year 10, you did a biology experiment and you had a petri dish, and it was really fun because you put some bacteria in it, and one of them you set on the windowsill and the other one you put in the incubator. Same bacteria, but what grew in the incubator was far more funky than what grew on the windowsill, right? And I say we're like human petri dishes. Now, we're not just talking about bacteria, but that is a good example, looking at genetics and genes and how it's influenced by bacteria. But we can put ourselves in environments that are either going to take our health where we want it to go or where we don't want to go. And this is the idea of epigenetics. So everything that surrounds our genes that triggers the way that they think, act, and behave. So when it comes to looking at conditions like reproductive issues, endometriosis or gynecological issues, it comes down to looking at these factors of what is triggering your body to do that. Why is your body behaving this way? And that's a plethora of things.
Yeah.
But if we can get a couple of them right and sorted, very often we're on our way. And, I might give patients a treatment letter that has 10 things that we need to tick off. But I know that if we can maybe do 3 of them and do 3 of them really well, the other 7 sort themselves out anyway. So the common things we'd be looking for, stress is without doubt number one.
Right.
And stress isn't just being busy or being overextended or running late to pick up the kids. Stress is how well is your gut your gut clearing your hormones, especially estrogen. How well is your liver detoxifying your hormones? What's your thyroid doing? How are your adrenals behaving? Do you wake up every morning and look in the mirror and think, oh my gosh, you just look like a bag of crap? To be frank, what is the thoughts that are going on? It's every part. What environment? Where do you live? Are you exposed to toxins or chemicals or EMFs, which sounds so overwhelming? You're like, oh my goodness, just stop, because where do I start? Right? Yeah. But if I can start to iron out some of the stress creases, and then I move straight into nutrition, because that can be the biggest stress of all. If we're not fueling our body properly, it won't work. And, food is either going to take you exactly where you want to go or exactly where you don't want to go. There's no real grey area. It does one of two things. It's either nutritious or it's not. And a lot of the foods that aren't nutritious are generally also inflammatory.
Right.
So if you're eating inflammatory foods with a gut that's not working properly and you can't digest it, you can't use the nutrients, you are constantly behind the 8 ball, and your body will show you that in certain symptoms. So I will always look at nutrition as a starting point. And, when patients start out, it's not necessarily what they can't have. We focus on what they can, or also
that's a great idea.
Little additions and changes. Because the more overwhelming it is, the less likely someone's going to do it. And I always want to deliver to a patient or anyone that's following anything that we're suggesting, what is the least amount of things I can get you to do to have the most profound change? Because once I can get that happening, the rest becomes easier. So, little things like fat and protein at every meal. Your hormones are made of fat and protein. If you're not eating fat and protein, you're just not getting what you need.
Good fat and protein, right?
Oh yeah, we're not talking about McDonald's drive-through. So, oily fish, avocado, nuts, seeds, all the good oils, those sorts of things are really important. We often skip them for our first meal of the day if you are eating breakfast.
I'm not, since I heard you speak, actually.
All right,
Intermittent fasting over here.
Well, we can talk about that in a second, because that is like the best hack of all time. So looking at those additions, those little things that you can add in, and also how do you still get to live your life in doing all of that? Because if you are the sort of person that gets so much joy from a meal out and a glass of wine, and we completely take that away from you, it's like, where's the joy?
Exactly right. Yeah.
So it's finding the balance for people. So so nutrition's really important, stress is really important. And then from there, I tend to drill a little bit deeper into specifics. But if I can get those 2 things sorted and really look at simple ways of, balancing hormones, then the rest becomes more apparent as to where we really need to dedicate our time. But they're the things that I would get anyone to do
it's
safely.
A good starting point.
Yeah.
Well, we've touched on intermittent fasting now, so
let's
quickly summarise what it is and what benefits people can get from it.
If you had have asked me 10 years ago my thoughts on intermittent fasting, I would have said to you that is the worst thing you could ever do for your hormones. It was the school of thought of 6 small meals a day, and we need to keep our metabolism firing. And what's interesting is that if you looked around at everybody that was doing that, I don't know that they were necessarily that healthy. I started to become interested in intermittent fasting after a patient several years ago. It was quite interesting case where she had some trauma to the body. As a result, wasn't ovulating and hadn't had a period for many, many years. And she came to me and she said, I would like to get my period back. And I'm like, okay, I don't say this very often, but you've got to be kidding me. Like, usually if there's some sort of structural trauma, that's a pretty big ask. Anyway, she started doing and on top of that, she was vegan. So that's always another challenge for some people.
Okay.
If they're not getting the nutrients from meat, some people don't, not all, but some don't cope with that. So that was another challenge.
Okay.
So anyway, she started on a regime that I'd put together for her. And she rings me at one point and says, I'm also just wanting to get your thoughts on intermittent fasting. I'm going to add it to the mix. And I was like, oh, well, why does that resonate with you? And she's like, I've done a heap of research and I think it's a good idea. And I'm like, I don't really know enough about it, but if you feel like it's resonating with you, go for it. So anyway, I get a phone call just before Christmas and she's like, you're never going to guess what? And I'm like, no. She's like, I got my period. I'm like, I don't even know what to say to you right now. That's like
wow.
against all odds, right?
Yeah.
So there had to be something in that. And sure, we'd given her a protocol to follow, like I would anybody, but there was something about the intermittent fasting that got me really curious. And so then I started to research it, and then I started to try it on with PCOS patients, polycystic ovarian syndrome, patients that had that. And I started to get amazing results. And I was like, all right, okay, let's keep drilling down. And so then from there, I then started to experiment with intermittent fasting. And it was only because I was doing a challenge at the gym and I was being quite regimented with just for 6 weeks in doing that. I thought, I'm going to start it now and just see what happens. Well, it completely changed my life.
It does, doesn't it?
Right.
Well, for people who don't know, can you explain what it is?
Yes, sure. So, I mean, there's various forms of fasting. We know the benefits start at around 12 hours. So if you can go from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. without eating, you're going to start to get some of the benefits of fasting. But we also know that the longer you push that, the more the benefits kick in. And it's around 16 hours where we understand that that's kind of a peak time of the benefits of fasting.
So you can have water.
You can have
and
water.
You can have herbal tea.
You can have black coffee, and you can have black tea, and you can have herbal tea.
Okay,
that's about it. But again, let's focus on what we can do, not what we can't do. So the 16 hours is, well, half of it's asleep. Exactly. And if you're looking at 8 hours of sleep and 4 hours either side of that, it's really not that hard. I get patients to then, start to focus on the 8 hours that they can eat, not the 16 hours that they're not eating. And so I tend to start patients out and say, all right, let's just try this 3 days a week and let's see how we go. And probably 8 out of 10 will come back to me and say, I just do it every day now because they feel so good when they're doing it. I think once upon a time we used to think that really stuffed our metabolism. And now we know better. We know that it doesn't really work like that. Unless maybe you've got a thyroid problem, we can talk about that. But so really the benefits are, food, that your digestive system and your gut isn't just about digestion. It's actually all the things it's doing when it's not digesting. So, we make really important, the majority of really important hormones like serotonin and dopamine in the gut. Around, we think up to 80 to 90% is made, not in the brain, but the gut. Our gut shapes our immune system and goes to repair. It's all about repair and recovery. So in the times that it's not dedicating its energy to digestion, it can do all these other things that can be really amazing, not to mention it helping to balance out our blood sugar levels as well. And so that's really where it benefits for those people that have PCOS or hormone imbalance, is regulating that, because when we have high levels, it can drive our testosterone through the roof. And this is an issue for PCOS or people with insulin resistance. So when we're insulin resistant, our cells just don't act and behave. They're kind of desensitized to insulin, and glucose can't move through the cell properly, and that becomes an issue. So when we can get this to happen more effectively, we can actually start to manage issues like PCOS very, very effectively.
Wow.
And I've had patients where truly I've had them on, supplement. I'm very less is more when it comes to a supplement regime. However, someone that has PCOS and wants to keep throwing more to the mix, if they're asking, they ask me questions and they say things like, what about inositol? Or what about, anyway, point is I've been able to get them off the majority of their supplements when they introduce fasting.
Wow, that's really effective.
It's really, really effective.
How did it work in your life?
Oh, changed my life. It's really interesting also. I was that person that if there was not a snack in my bag, I used to freak the heck out. I'd be like, what am I going to eat next? What's coming? I'd be thinking about, what's next. For me, it's changed my thought for food, and I enjoy food so much more.
Yeah, you get excited
You
when
get
you're like,
really
it's time to
excited,
eat.
right?
It's the 8 hours has commenced.
Totally. I also know that if I'm stuck without food, I'm fine. I can go a long time. Not that that's what it's about, but my body runs on a different system now. And so, especially traveling, I do a lot of travel.
Yeah.
And I can go for the whole duration of, if I'm going, say I need to get to, I don't know, somewhere in the US, and I leave here at 6:30 a.m. and I don't arrive till midnight, and that plain food can be pretty shocking. I'm okay.
You start to actually enjoy the feeling of
Yes.
it because you know that your body's restoring in this
Totally.
process of you not eating.
Right? And it's not about being starving. It's about the difference of being, I guess, empty is a good way of.
And light. I was going
That's
to say.
right.
Feel quite light and not bloated
That's
and
right.
not gluggy.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was really, really interesting. My composition of my body's changed too. And I think that's probably also because I changed my diet at the same time. And I thought I had a great diet before, and I didn't have a bad diet, but I wasn't eating to support my training as well. So,
Right.
That's been a big game changer. And I kind of did all these things at once. So is it one or the other? I think it's a bit of a combination of all of those things. But yeah, definitely it's been, just from my mental perspective and my physical being, it's been a game changer. And I definitely, it's life-changing.
Huge advocate
And
for
it's
it.
totally like, it's one of those things you think, oh, yeah, I was like, literally, I'm just going to try them for 6 weeks. And it got to the end of the 6 weeks and I'm like, well, I'm not stopping
Yeah,
now.
enjoying
And now
this.
what's really hilarious is my husband resisted for ages. He was just like, I don't even know how you do that. And I used to get really mad with him because he would be so fixated on, what are we eating for lunch? What are we eating for dinner? And I'd be like, I don't really care. And then he started, and now he's converted, and it's quite hilarious. It's a bit
Got
of
a
a
convert over here too.
right. He's a bit like, I'll be like, have you eaten? He's like, no. Have you? And I'm like, no. Are we going to do that sometime soon? He's like, oh yeah, I guess so. You're not fixated on food anymore.
Yeah,
And I like that.
Exactly right. Well, you're definitely a person who walks your talk, and I have heard you speak many times before, but one time in person in particular. And I do remember you talking about your family and the journey that you've been on, supporting a natural health regime. Are you happy to share that with us today?
Yes, absolutely. So I think you're referring to Geordie, our little
your
boy,
son.
who was diagnosed with CF when he was 4 weeks old. So, most mums all mums pretty much that live, at least in this country, are familiar with the heel prick test in hospital. And that's one of the sort of 6 or 7 genetic issues it tests for, is cystic fibrosis. So what was really interesting about that was that it wasn't a new thing to us. My best friend from high school, who I still remain very close with today, her little boy had CF as well, and we'd been very much part of his journey. And so that was very confronting, not just because it was my son, but what are the chances of 2 long-term best friends having the children with the same genetic condition? And we both got girls and then boys. It's just, so that was really, really interesting in the sense that, when you get the phone call from the hospital and they say, how are you today, Mrs. Kringoudis? And you're like, I'm fine, but I'd really like to know why you're ringing me. And then they reveal that to you. Then they'll say, have you had or do you know much about it? And I was like, oh my goodness, I know more than the average person.
Right.
And so that was, I guess sometimes knowledge is power, but also ignorance is bliss, right? So I guess we use that knowledge to our advantage, and we're able to make some decisions and choices based around intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And really for him, it's been a bit of it's always a journey, right? But so for him, we really did buy our time, I guess, with what we felt was right for him medically,
right.
Which was very much outside of the box. And we've always had to advocate for that. And I don't tell people this because I think we have all the answers. It just worked for us.
Exactly. And if it's worked for you,
right.
you feel as though it can work for others.
Right. And, the medical system saves lives, so don't get me wrong. But in this instance, for me, I really made a decision really early on that I wanted to treat his health, not his sickness. And as any mother would in those circumstances, I did go to quite a dark place for a few days and really sit in my emotions and my crap that was coming up, because you are confronted with, you've got this little baby and you're looking at him and I'm like, I want to love you, but you could be really sick and I don't even know how long you're here for. And it was just the most, when you get news of a loved one being unwell and maybe it's terminal and maybe they're 40, 50, 60, 70, they've lived their life to a degree. This little thing hadn't,
not
right?
at all.
And it was such a weird sensation and feeling and thoughts and everything. It was almost like I want to love you, but I'm really scared to do that. These were the thoughts that were coming to me as a mum. And I think anyone can relate to that has a child that has some type of issue come up where children are hard because they can't talk to you when they're at that age either. So anyway, point being is that I really sat, and I think that was part of my healing with that, was I sat in those emotions at the time. And I'm that kind of person. I can't pretend something's fine if it's not. And so I went through those motions, and it was one of the days that we were heading into the hospital and we were talking to our pediatrician, and you have to see a whole group of experts over a period of time. And I said to my husband on the way in, I think it's going to be okay. And he was like, whatever. Okay, Nat, whatever. And he does that to me sometimes, where he just looks at me and is like, I don't even know what you're thinking, but okay, I'm just going to say yes. And so anyway, we've gone into the hospital and we've sat down with the pediatrician, and I've said to him, all right, I understand what you're advocating for Geordie, and I understand that there's a protocol and a system, but do we have to do that? Because it's just not, as a mother, it's just not resonating with me. CF treatment for babies at the time, and I don't know what it is now because we're not in that world anymore. He's 7, but it was a very, very hefty dose of antibiotics for a duration of time.
For a long duration.
Yeah, 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I just don't understand. What about his gut? And what about his liver? And, what about his immune system? These were the questions that I was asking. And the pediatrician was saying, I get it. I know, but this is what we do. And I was like, well, I can't do that. I just can't do it. And so I remember having the conversation. I said to him, can I have some time to work with him in a way that feels right? And I'm not trying to be woo-woo. I'm not trying to be difficult. But as a mum, I've got to really trust what's coming up for me right now.
Yeah.
And so we worked out a plan of attack that we were all happy with. And, 7 years later, Geordie is thriving. He's a very happy, healthy little boy. And I really think...
So good to hear.
Right? I know. It's so... But again, it was because it's got no... I don't think it's got anything... Well, not that it's got nothing. It's definitely got to do with what we've given him. But I actually think that the minute that you can align to taking your health where you want it to go and not where you don't want it to go, it's very freeing.
Yeah.
So I just kept coming back to health. I just kept... Every time my mind would wander off to sickness and hospital and all of the nasty things that were coming up as a fear for me, I just remind myself or try and look at him and find evidence of health, because it's always there if we look for it. And so, the reason I tell his story isn't, again, it's not because I think we have all the answers or think we're heroes. It's because no matter what situation you're in, if you can look for the evidence of health and well-being, you can find it. Exactly. And then if you can allow that to grow and hold on to that, that's really where the magic is, and not feeding the fears. So
did you integrate traditional medicine in his process as well?
We haven't had to use much for him. We've done a lot of lifestyle adjustments. We used to do a lot of things when he was little, and unfortunately we moved into a house that was full of mold, and I was like, oh gosh, how's this going to go? It was really interesting. He got not quite sick, but he was repeatedly having colds at that time. And so I remember saying to my husband, oh, I think we're going to have to move. And we just did a heap of research as to how we could clean the air, and that was enough for him. And it wasn't at the time. I looked back. It was not till 6 months later I looked back and went, he hasn't been sick for 6 months. And it was about the time that we started, air purifiers, essential oils, a few other.
You hadn't even thought about it.
I hadn't thought about it, no. And totally. And now when I think about him, I mean, he got sniffly maybe 2 months ago for maybe 2 days. Passed it on to me, and I had it for 2 weeks.
So he's got a really strong immune system.
He has a really strong immune system. So, I think for me, that was what it was about. It was like every day that I don't have to bombard his system with anything that's going to compromise his immune system in this moment is another day under the belt. So that when I need, or if I need, these antibiotics, they're going to work.
Exactly.
Right? And that's what I kept thinking. I just kept thinking, if he's not sick, I just, and not that approach isn't for everybody. But like I said, put the medicine aside and really focus on what you want to do. So your nutrition became really important. And now he's a 7-year-old. So, his repertoire of foods is like 4 things.
Well, traditional medicine and alternate medicine can work hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Really
And,
well.
again, I have not closed the door on that. I will absolutely always look to what Geordie needs. If he needed certain things. But, the whole way along, we definitely have had to, really check in with ourselves and make sure that we're doing what's best for Geordie. And we haven't needed to use, other than he has digestive enzymes, other than that, we haven't needed to use anything.
That's a great
to
outcome.
date. But
I should ask,
who knows?
How is your friend's son? How's he doing?
Yeah, he's doing really well as well. What's really interesting in that process is that I guess at some point we got to look at what one was doing and look at what the other was doing and adjust things. And I have to say they definitely live a stricter line than we do to keep his health in check. But all children are different. So this is the thing.
And everybody's
That's
different.
right. So, but I know that, again, speaking to nutrition, and she can definitely talk to that as to how different he is when nutrition wavers, and it really is a game changer for a lot of people that are suffering from some type of health problem or illness. So, the thing with Geordie or anyone with any type of genetic issue is you've just got to try and maximize cellular function. At the end of the day, how do I make his cells work better? How do I make his body work better? And if I can always be focused on that. What it also did, it made us focus on health as a family. It wasn't just about him and isolating him. It was about us
all
together, doing that together. And now now he's old enough to ask questions. He'll say, why do I have to go to the hospital? Or why do I have to have a blood test? And I will always say, we just want to make sure you can be as healthy as possible.
Yeah, and that's a great answer.
Totally. But I think our default is always the fear. And a lot of us would find ourselves saying, we just want to make sure you're not sick. So it's about that
words
mindset.
Are
so powerful, so powerful. So, I always want to think about what I'm saying to him before I actually say it. I'm not going to say to him, you need to have a blood test. We want to check if there's anything bad going on. I would always want to say we want to make sure it's all where it should be at, and really working towards that. And we have a team of healthcare professionals now, alternate, and I don't play a huge role in his care because it's too hard as a parent to do that. I rely on other people that can be objective.
Of course, yeah. It would be very difficult to be hands-on in that.
Yeah, we have a team of people that help us. We have, Geordie's always had spinal care. He's always had an integrative GP as well as his paediatrician and experts at the hospital as well. So it's integrative. Yeah.
Well, you've also got a daughter, and she's how old is she? She's
11.
11 years old.
Yes.
So it does bring me to talk about another topic that I'm interested in too, which is starting puberty for young girls. And I have noticed recently that there's been a little bit of a spike in people who I've been talking to that of girls who are going through puberty a little bit earlier than we probably did when we were growing up. Is this something that you found in your work?
Yeah, definitely. I think the average age when I was growing up was 13 to get your period, and I was 13. The average age is leaning now more towards 11. So it shows us that we're doing something.
It's primary school, so that's that big difference is between primary school and high school.
That's right, totally. I think environmentally we know that estrogen plays a role, and as we were talking about at the beginning, clearing estrogen is really important. And if we're sort of loading up on meats that aren't necessarily raised the right way, that can be definitely a factor. Chicken, we know. But also that was kind of maybe a factor more for us as well. And don't forget that they're a genetic imprint of us.
Yeah.
So part of it isn't just what they're doing. Part of it's what we've done and passed on to them. What our mothers were doing, because really they've come from our mother. So, looking at that, we can't always know, but we can maximise, again, body function and always look at ways that we can balance hormones better, I think. But looking for clues and signs as to how they're responding and what they're doing and what they're going through, I think is really important. But it's definitely, the age is definitely younger. Yeah.
How do you prepare a younger child for this? I mean, you've written a couple of books about this, haven't you?
Yeah. So what's been interesting in writing Beautiful You, my latest book, is that it speaks to the teenager. although everyone that gets it says, well, it just speaks to women, Nat. And I'm like, I know, but I really want young women to be empowered. I think that we need the way that we change this and the way we make it less of a burden and less scary is that we start to answer the questions children are asking us from the get-go.
Yeah.
So not just when they're 14. But, they will lead with what they're ready to hear. They ask questions, where did I come from? How did I get in your tummy, mummy? How did I get out? These sorts of questions.
That's the big question.
Right? But we've lied to our children forever. The stork came or the doctor put you in there or, at the time that they're asking these questions is the most appropriate time to be answering them. And if we're not answering them truthfully and with the facts, we're missing a beautiful opportunity.
Or they'll get their information from the wrong source.
Absolutely. So, I think if it's like anything, if we just constantly speak to the facts when they're asking and it's age appropriate, you're not going to give them the whole rundown of what went on in the bedroom the night before. When it does come the time to have these discussions, it's not this like bomb that's dropped on them, because that's what it felt like for me. It was certainly like my world had just exploded, and then I had all these feelings that I didn't know how to deal with, because it was exciting, but it was really scary and kind of confronting at the same time. And you can't know as a 13 or 11-year-old what that is. So it's just this continual conversation, I think, that we need to be having and gently, organically building on that each time it's appropriate to do that.
But with children getting their periods at such a young age, how do they manage the hormones? Because, at 9, 10, 11, all these hormones running through your body, is there a natural way to say, let's try and balance this, or are there particular foods that they can eat, or is there any type of treatment that they can have naturally?
We've got to let kids' hormones do what they're supposed to do. Estrogen kicks in, they grow breast buds, it starts to instigate the axis that needs to then evolve and allow them to start menstruating. It's when you're finding that there's an imbalance, and you can't know that really unless you're early onset puberty. You can't really know that until it starts to happen. And I guess if it's happening earlier, within reason, I would just allow that to happen. It's more so, what does the first period reveal to you? I think that's more of the conversation. If the first period is fairly much a non-event, but you just get your period and then, move on, great, healthy, If your first period is full of pain and suffering, we need to fix it now. And that's the reason. That would be enough for me to prompt, dietary changes was where I'd start. I wouldn't go straight to the whole testing and blah, 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 because kids' hormones, they take a long time to sort themselves out and are very much influenced by the same things as us, stress and environment, but they're not supposed to be regular from the get-go. It's very much part of the ebbs and flows, and I think this is what a lot of parents don't understand, is that really until they're 18, their hormones are going to be all over the place.
Fluctuating.
And really they don't settle until around 24. So just knowing that can be comforting, that you don't need to worry or panic or freak out. Oops.
Yeah, and have that expectation.
That's right, totally. So that I think is really important. But yeah, if the first period is a problem, let's look at what that's telling us from that moment. Don't wait years for that. If it's a bit irregular, within reason, I'd look at the irregularity. If it was irregular but there was no other problems, I wouldn't worry. But if it's irregular and you're starting to see acne, especially as a sign, and when I say acne, like more than a couple of spots here and there, I would then definitely look into that as well. Acne's there telling you something. It's not supposed to be there.
It's a sign for something bigger.
You're supposed to have a little, there's supposed to be a little bit of variation, and your skin does change a bit and you get a few zits, but it shouldn't be full-blown acne. That's
and not just throwing medication on it to try and fix it.
And that's never going to fix it. Topically, we used to think that was the way that we fixed our skin, and we know that can give you some relief, but it's not going to fix it as such.
It's not going to back to the root problem.
So always
looking,
root cause. Always looking for that. But yeah, I would definitely, anything facial hair, acne, dark hair growth, that sort of stuff. I would always be not dark. If you are European descent, you're going to have dark hair, and that's tricky on little kids because it can often look out of place. But it's when it's more than what would be considered normal that would prompt me to look into that too.
Yeah. You also talk about the pill a lot, and you're very passionate about it. So I do want to touch on that, and we could probably do a whole episode on the pill. I know when I was 16, 17, I was given the pill by my doctor and sent away and I used it all the way up until I had children
Right.
and didn't know anything about my periods or my cycles or my body until after
like
I had
most
children.
women on the planet. I think the thing with any contraception, and we'll say the pill, but it can extend to any synthetic hormone, is that it's one thing to use it as a contraception. That's one area that we would use it for. But there is a big number of women using it to try and treat a problem. And that's where the problem actually lies. So we're using the pill to treat everything from PMS, ovulation pain, period pain, acne, mood swings, anxiety, ovulation pain, missing periods, heavy bleeding, like so many things. PCOS, endometriosis, adenomyosis, amenorrhea, like so many things. I think the issue is that a young woman's hormones are definitely finding their groove throughout their teen years. If you, say at 16, decide to use the pill because, say, you don't have an irregular cycle, say it's very sporadic, or say you haven't got your period yet, which is really common. Doctors will prescribe the pill to quote-unquote regulate your cycle, which you can't do. You're bleeding, but it's a bleed. It's not because of ovulation. It's because you're withdrawing a hormone and therefore your body's bleeding as a result. That's not a period. And so, with that in mind, if you are halting a woman's hormones at 16 when she's going through a phase where her body is responding and learning and allowing her hormones to mature, and you halt that at 16, when she comes off that when she's 28, you got to start that process from that same where you started, 16.
That's right.
Which is crazy. You would never do this anywhere else. So I just don't understand why we would think logically that that's a good idea. It's never going to be a good idea.
I think education on it is so important because I had no idea what I was putting into my body.
Totally.
I had no idea about the effects on libido. I had no idea about breast pain or...
Totally. So, here's the thing. Like I said, and I'm not saying you shouldn't use it. I'm saying we should be informed when we're using it, and we need to look at what... I look forward to the day that your doctor prescribes you the pill and says, look, this is the option that I can see is what I think best for you. But we know the pill severely robs gut health. We know that the pill not sterilize. Well, it does temporarily sterilize, but it flatlines your hormones. We know it depletes your vitamin and mineral stores. We know it upsets your digestive function. We know it's going to impact your liver. And we also know that these are the side effects as well. So here's the things that I'd like you to do if you choose to take it.
In conjunction with
right?
it. Yeah.
And the pill is bigger than anything else. You can't stop it from doing what it does. It's designed to totally flatline your hormones. That's what it does. But we can at least support our body if that's the choice we make, and we can make an informed choice. What I would be saying, however, is if you are using the pill for anything other than contraception, we've got to look at the why.
Absolutely.
And really get to the core of that. And most of these issues are treatable. And if we can treat it as a teenager, we're not going to be dealing with infertility when we're 32. Because we fixed the problem when we were 16, and we know that it's potentially a problem, but if we look after ourselves, it's going to be far less of an issue. So I really speak to that. And the other thing I would say is that for young women, for contraception, they should be using barrier methods because STDs are without doubt one of the biggest problems when it comes to our fertility and health. And if young women are not protecting themselves, then that's a big problem too. So, but I think using the idea that the pill is a solution, really, when you look at all of that, it's really not.
Opens up a can of worms, doesn't it? Well, I definitely want to have you back and talking in full on a full episode about the pill. So hopefully we can do that.
Absolutely, I'd love to do that.
Thank you for sharing all this advice. There's so much more to learn from you. As I said, you can follow Nat on her website at natkringoudis.com, and she's got a couple of podcasts under her belt as well, ebooks and a wealth of information that you can get on her Instagram page also. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Be part of the conversation. Let me know what you thought of this episode on my Instagram, Maritza_Barone. There's so much more goodness to come. So make sure you subscribe to the show. Be happy, be healthy, be present, be wise.